Hello, AICE General Paper. Today I am recording what I would say in class so that I am not being loud and interrupting the recordings that are happening next door. So we're going to follow along with the essay that you just evaluated. Make sure you have that in front of you so we can go over it. I'm going to first outline a couple of things to note that are related to what you're going to have to do on your paper 1 in 11 days now. 11 days, it's written behind me, on April 25th, just so you guys have some understanding about like the formatting, and then we're going to go into the material stuff. So let me share my screen first. All right, so number one. Okay, number one, I want to outline the format. So looking at just the area where the essay is written, this is exactly the type of paper you're going to get. So whatever question you choose, you're going to write that number on the far left box or column at the top of the paper. You don't technically have to write it on each and every page, but it doesn't hurt to do that just in case something goes wrong. And so you'll write it at the beginning of each page, and then you'll just write your response as you go through. I also wanted to outline, notice that they stay within their lines, so and they don't skip lines. So don't skip any lines for paragraphs, just indent, that shows it's a new paragraph, but don't skip any lines because you want to make sure you use all the space and room. If you need an extra paper, they do give you inserts that you can also add to it, but it's a little bit of a complicated process and it might stall the time you need to actually write your essay. So I would recommend just trying to stay within the packet that they give you so you can save each and every second of the essay. Also notice that it's written in pen, so they don't erase any mistakes, they just cross them out. This person scribbled. I wouldn't recommend that. One line is always best because if you cross out something that may actually be beneficial to your essay, they sometimes are nice and AICE and they will give you points for things that you were going to bring up but you didn't. So keep that in mind. Just one line so they can still see what it may be the mistake was and that it could potentially help you if it was a mistake to call it a mistake. All right, so now let's get into the content of this. First, let's look at the question. So the question that they were asked was this number 3 here. Television will always be the most popular form of entertainment. To what extent do you agree? So this is discursive. Actually, no, sorry, it's argumentative. But you'll notice that they don't immediately make known their side. Well, they'll talk about both sides. We'll talk about it here in a second. Okay, so let's start with number 1. That was about their introduction. So hopefully you saw that it was a fairly good introduction. It wasn't bad by any sense of the word, but it wasn't also great. I wouldn't call this like an amazing introduction, and neither did AICE. So it's the comment that was made here is, while there are some errors in expression, the introduction is clear and focused on the question. So throughout the essay, you're going to notice that it's not written in the most academically challenging language. That's something that they know and that they lost some points for, is that they didn't try and use academically challenging vocabulary, but they got their point across. So if when in doubt and you're struggling to make it academically challenging, it's better just to default that the content is better instead of having to worry about academically challenging words. So that's what this candidate did. Okay, so the introduction, again, good introduction. They outline the question. Notice that they use keywords from the question too. So like the question said, popular as a form of entertainment, they use the word popular. Like it sounds silly, but that's something you should do. Use the wording from the question in your essay so that they know that you're breaking down the question. Because remember, one of those rows of the rubric, to get the highest points, you have to show that you're evaluating the question. And so in their introduction, they do that. Number 2 talks about one of their major points. So they used Netflix as a big driver of their overall argument. Maybe a little too much and not enough variety, but they did still do some variety. We'll get to that in a second. But this is the point they made about Stranger Things. So they make a clear connection with TV and its mainstream culture connection. So they used Stranger Things, which I'm sure every one of you, maybe not all of you, but most of you have watched or at least heard of, especially the most recent season, because you could not, for the life of you, get away from the song Running Up the Hill by Kate Bush. because that was all over the place. And so they talk about how it's brought some mainstream back to older songs and musicians because of it was spotlighted in the series. And in fact, Kate Bush got a ton of money um, because of the Stranger Things, even though the song is from the 80s. It's very old, older than Mr. Combrinck. It renewed its popularity and allowed her to even get more royalties from that song. So that's a good discussion on popularity and how TV drives that popularity. They then continue that. Oh, before we get into that one, let's look at number 3. So this is a huge thing that I want you guys to also do is after they make their point and they explain their point about the whole Metallica Kate Bush thing, they then revert back to the question and they say it again, right? Culture change helps prove that television and its programs are more than just popular, again, using the wording from the question, they have become a staple in communities across the world. So after they have given a point of evidence and explained that point of evidence, they then revert back to the question, which you should continuously do as well. They continue on their point with another Netflix series and Squid Games and its impact on society, talking about how people were like dressing up and just how like the mainstreamness of Squid Games for even people that may not have watched Squid Games, they still could have recognized like parts that were from Squid Games. Number 5, again, they link back to the question. So this candidate, one of the best things that they do is they continuously go back to the question after they've made a point, explain their point, go back to question, make point, explain point, go back to question. And that's something you should do as well. They don't only focus on the Netflix series. They do also show some wider content by talking about sports and how it is impacted by television. They don't, I mean, they spend what, almost a whole page and a half, page and a quarter on the Netflix. And then they spend like half a paragraph on the news or on sports and then half on news. So they do show other wide ranging opinions, but they don't go detailed enough. And then we're going to talk about that when we get to the end, that they spent too much time almost on the Netflix, like that was their primary focus. And they didn't really give enough information on the other points of why TV might be popular, which lost them a couple of points, but nothing crazy. But it's just worth noting that you can't spend your whole time on one point of evidence. You have to vary your evidence and you have to spread the wealth, so to speak. So they do talk about how sports is also part of the whole popularity in TV, as well as news, how people get their news and things like that. So again, 6 and 7 give alternative perspectives on the same argument of TV being popular. So they do their first 2 paragraphs, or sorry, their first paragraph obviously is their introduction. They have one whole paragraph with Netflix, so for TV being popular. Their second body paragraph is again for TV being popular using news and sports. And then they start looking at the other side's opinion. So they look at number 8. What they're trying to talk about there is how maybe it's not TV that's the most popular. They talk about books for a second and how books are popular, but they also are critical of books and they show how some people may think books are popular. In my opinion, they could have gone a whole lot deeper into the popularity of books and how it's in mainstream culture based on like Hunger Games. And I know they mentioned some of the books and authors and things, but like talking about Harry Potter in detail and Twilight and like all of the mainstream books that kind of created like cultural phenomenons. They didn't get that deep into it, but they still mention it, but they talk about the limitations of it, which is fine. They can absolutely do that. And that was a good assessment to say, like, some people may say books are also popular. However, technology has come in the way of books and people aren't reading as much anymore. So that's a good discussion that they had in there, which was point number 8. And then they dive into point number 9. What I find funny is that point number 9 is probably the more not real. That's not the word I was looking for. It's about social media. And I would think that TV and social media are the 2 competing parts of popular culture. And it doesn't feel like they spend enough time talking about how culture is shaped by social media. Granted, this was written in 2023, but still they had all the same apps that we have now and fairly much the same popularity, right? So the TikToks, the Snapchats, the things like that. But they don't really go detailed on it to show how that is shaping culture as much, if not more. They just really spend what, half a paragraph on it. So they lose a little bit of points on their evaluation part because they get to the point of evaluating something, but then they don't follow through on the end. But again, they still show a variety, so it's altogether it's a good essay, and they show a wide range of points. So remember, everything that they say is evidence. So the books, those are evidence. The social media, that's evidence. The TV series, evidence. Sports news, those are all evidence, not from a quote, but they're evidences of things that show that TV is popular or TV is not at the most popular. Then they get into their conclusion. So number 10, they do go back to the question again, which is perfect, right? As they're concluding, they revert back to what the question's asking. They talk about popularity. I think they say popular again. Do they not? I think they did. Somewhere in there they did. But they go back to the question, which again, keep referring back to the question because ultimately that's what you're doing is you are answering the question. So it doesn't make sense not to use the language from the question and to keep referring back to the question throughout your essay. And then number 11, overall, it's a clear essay. They don't use vocabulary ambitiously. So they could have probably replaced some of these words with more ambitious words. They didn't do that, so they did lose some points. They evaluate, but it's not sustained. That's something that they note in here is that so again, they come right up to the line of like a full evaluation, but then they back away. So again, in my mind, I think the biggest part that they didn't evaluate fully was the whole social media aspect and its comparisons to maybe even the Netflix, because that was their big driving argument on one side. Well, let's have a big driving argument on the other side with social media. And it doesn't feel like they did that. So I think that was one of the biggest things they could have improved upon. And then their range of examples need improvement. That's noted down here. So use a greater range of examples to support the arguments. Again, I think that's because they spend a whole page on Netflix. So that one example did get fully explained, but then everything else gets kind of touched and then left alone, touched and left alone, touched and left alone. So I think if they spent more time or even took out one, so maybe they took out books and just focused solely on social media, that might have been better. If it was a time restraint thing. It doesn't seem like it would have been a time restraint thing. It just seems like they felt like they were done, but they didn't fully evaluate. So making sure you are giving equal energy to all the points that you're hitting and not just being like, well, here's the one thing I was going to talk about the whole time. And I know I have to put others. So I'm just going to mention this, mention this, mention this, mention this. That's not going to help you with your essay ultimately. Okay. So yeah, that was the evaluation. If you have questions, you're welcome to ask me. And you can refer back to this video if you need to go over the essay. I think that was everything I wanted to mention. Oh, I did want to mention one thing. This is a high scoring essay. And notice it's a 24 out of 30. And I'm going to do math on a calculator because Mr. Combrinck is not good with math in his head. So that's an 80. That's a high scoring. Like that's a good essay. So I don't want people to be like, oh, if I get an 80, I'm not doing well. No, that's fine. That's really good. You strive for 24 out of 30. You're phenomenal. You're gonna be one of the top scorers of the AICE General Paper. It's not so much about getting all 30 points. I don't know if I've ever seen an essay that's gotten all 30 points or even heard of someone that's gotten a perfect score getting all 30 points. So your goal is to get within the 21 range and up on your essay. That is considered a high scoring essay. But also remember that A, B, C, D, and E are all passing scores in Cambridge. So even if you're a middle scorer and you have an essay that's in the middle, you still at a good chance of getting an E for the course. So don't be disheartened if you feel like your score is not the highest when they do release scores next year. Just do your best and do all the parts that you can to get as many points as possible. And the whole goal again is to pass the class. So work at that. All right, look at the next assignment on Schoology. I don't know how to stop the recording.